In Trinidad and Tobago, 3 out of every 10 people are challenged with hypertension or high blood pressure. In Barbados, 4 out of every 10 people are challenged with the same condition. A soil study done in the past decade revealed that bread and other flour products contributed to the high sodium consumption in that Caribbean nation. So now that leaves a question that needs to be addressed or needs to be looked at. Is bread and our flour products contributing to the hypertension crisis in Trinidad and Tobago? I will address this question right after this. Hi, I'm Howard Spencer of Spencer's Whole Food Plant-Based Eats and Treats, where it is believed that the path to good health is not via personal responsibility, but it is by changing the food environment, whether in your house, community, or nation. In my last video, I addressed the hypertension crisis in Trinidad and Tobago, and I highlighted some of the food items that we as a population consume and how these items can possibly be contributing to the hypertension crisis in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, one of the arguments that I made in that video was that the food environment was contributing to the hypertension crisis in Trinidad and Tobago because of the makeup of the foods that we in Trinidad and Tobago consume on a regular basis. It is essentially the food environment that is contributing to our nation's ill health. It was acknowledged in the last video that we have over 300,000 people in Trinidad and Tobago living or being challenged with hypertension or high blood pressure. For this number to be so large in a small nation like ours, it is believed by us at Spencer's Whole Food Plant-Based Eats and Treats that it is not a matter of personal responsibility like what a lot of politicians, medical professionals, and people in the public domain like to spout, but we believe that for the hypertension numbers to be this abundant, it has to be something more than just personal responsibility. The nation of Barbados, they took a very systematic approach to addressing the crisis of hypertension that they are currently experiencing. The approach that they took was, first of all, to gather data of how serious the hypertension crisis is and what could be the potential drivers of this hypertension epidemic. Now, it is well known that excessive salt consumption is one of the risk factors or the potential drivers for hypertension, whether it be for an individual or whether it be for an entire nation. So what Barbados did was that they did a national salt study between the years 2011 to 2014. And in that study, what they tried to do was they tried to get certain data points so that policy can be established and driven in order to get the population healthier. Now, one of the aims of that salt study, which I mentioned, was to establish the average sodium intake of an average citizen of Barbados. Now, that study revealed that the average Barbados citizen consumes around 2,700 milligrams of sodium a day. Now, let's put that into perspective. In my last video and a couple other videos before that, it was mentioned that the World Health Organization recommendation for sodium intake on a daily basis was 2,000 milligrams of sodium a day. The American Heart Association has an even stricter recommendation. They recommend no more than 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day, especially for people who are of Black or African American or Caribbean heritage. 2,700 milligrams of sodium a day. That is 700 milligrams over the World Health Organization recommendation. And that is almost double the American Heart Association recommendation. So it is very plausible that the high sodium intake of an average Bajan citizen can be contributing to the hypertension crisis being experienced in that country. The second aim of the Barbados Salt Study was to identify the main dietary sources of sodium in the population, and it was revealed that the main dietary sources of sodium in the population were poultry dishes, rice dishes, and bread and flour products. In this video, we focusing on bread and flour products. And you can see that bread and flour products in Barbados contributed to 12.5% of the daily sodium intake of an average Barbados citizen. Now, a similar salt study was supposed to be done in Trinidad and Tobago. On this slide, I have the cover of the document, the National Strategic Plan for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases, Trinidad and Tobago, 2017 to 2021, which was a document highlighting the state of chronic disease in Trinidad and Tobago and the action items that were to be undertaken in order to address the chronic disease scourge facing the population. Now, mind the years 2017 to 2021. At the time of recording, it is 2024 and almost on the verge of going into 2025. So just take a note of that. One of the action items that was to be done between the years 2017 to 2021 was, as you can see on the slide, establish baseline for population sodium and trans fat intake. In other words, studies were supposed to be done and conducted on the population to determine the baseline sodium intake in Trinidad and Tobago and the baseline trans fat intake of Trinidad and Tobago. And I could tell you, these studies, as far as I know, have not been conducted in the general population. As to why that is the case, I'm the wrong person to ask, and I'll just leave it as that. A document from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, a report from 2003 of the nutritional profile of Trinidad and Tobago, revealed that in Trinidad and Tobago, the principal cereal consumed in Trinidad and Tobago was wheat, especially in the form of flour, which was consumed by 86% of households in Trinidad and Tobago. And more specifically, in terms of bread and other wheat flour products, that was consumed by 57% of households in Trinidad and Tobago. However, one does not need to be a researcher to know that bread, flour, and flour products take up a major part of the Trinidad and Tobago diet. Here are some of the flour products that are consumed in Trinidad and Tobago, which are usually either made at home or made in small shops around Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the flour products that we in Trinidad and Tobago consume are white bread, whole wheat bread or multigrain bread, hops bread, dinner rolls, coconut bake, fried bake, sada roti, paratha or bus of shot. That is another kind of roti. Dal puri roti, pita bread, whole wheat or white flour wraps, doubles, aloo pie, and sahina. These are just some of the flour products that we in Trinidad and Tobago consume on a regular basis. Not to mention the flour products that are consumed by the population because of these brands supplying these products. However, this is the multi-million-dollar question. Does consuming bread lead to elevated blood pressure? To answer this question, we go to the nation of Mexico. In Mexico, it is estimated that the rate of people who are challenged with hypertension is around 32%. In my research, the only study which I came upon, which was linking bread consumption to blood pressure elevation, was this study seen here on this slide. I will put a link to that study in the description box below. However, one of the major takeaways of this study was that people living in Mexico City who consumed two certain types of breads, more than once a week, had a greater risk of elevated blood pressure. Elevated blood pressure in this study was determined to be if your systolic was over 120 millimeters of mercury and or your diastolic was greater than 80 millimeters of mercury, that was determined as elevated blood pressure. The two types of breads that, according to the study, put one at greater risk of elevated blood pressure. One of these breads was a bread known as bolillo, seen here in this picture on the right hand side of the bar chart. If you consumed bolillo and another type of bread known as telera more than once a week, what happened was that you were at a 39% increased risk of having elevated blood pressure as defined by the study. Now here were some other takeaways from that study as well. Bread, as in savory bread or sweet bakery goods, was the major contributor to daily sodium intake among the adult Mexican population. Bread, as in savory bread and sweet bakery goods, contributed to 16% of the total sodium intake, as opposed to Barbados, which was 12.5% of the daily sodium intake. Another takeaway from that study was that the impact of bread consumption on daily sodium intake is probably not only due to the salt added to the bread for preservation and taste, but it was also due to the amount of bread and flour products consumed by the population. Just to drive this point home, in 2012, the per capita white bread consumption in Mexico was 24.4 kilos, with an average sodium content of 520 milligrams of sodium per 100 grams of bread or flour products. And this is for those of you who are not sure what bolillo looks like. This is what bolillo looks like. 100 grams of bolillo has 610 milligrams of sodium, and 100 grams of telera has 530 milligrams of sodium. So now, one of the things that can be gleaned from both the Barbados salt study and the study here from Mexico City was that there are two themes to be looked at when looking at bread and how it contributes to elevated blood pressure. The first theme is the sodium content of the bread or the flour product itself. The next factor which needs to be looked at is the amount of bread or flour products that is consumed on a regular basis. And it was determined in both the Barbados study and the study from Mexico City was that the amount of bread consumed played a major role in addition to the sodium content of the bread or the flour products themselves. So now here's the question that we in Trinidad and Tobago we need to answer. What are the sodium contents of the bread and flour products that we consume? Well, that is what I'm going to attempt to answer right about now. One slice of basic white bread has a sodium content of, on average, around 300 milligrams of sodium. One slice of whole wheat bread has a sodium content of around 300 milligrams of sodium in it. That's according to the usual recipes used to make bread or whole wheat bread in Trinidad and Tobago. One half's bread can have a sodium content of 315 milligrams. Two dinner rolls can have a sodium content of 240 milligrams of sodium. 100 grams of coconut bake can have a sodium content of almost 400 milligrams of sodium. One portion of fried bake can have a sodium content of 550 milligrams of sodium. One slice of celery roti can have 475 milligrams of sodium in it. One portion of paratha or bus-up shot, the sodium content of one portion of paratha or bus-up shot, it can range between 300 to 550 milligrams of sodium in it. 100 grams of dal puri roti, the sodium content can range between 300 to 470 milligrams of sodium in it. One pita bread can have almost 400 milligrams of sodium in it. One wrap, the sodium content can range between 150 on the low end to 500 milligrams on the high end. One doubles, the sodium content can range between 250 to 385 milligrams of sodium. One aloo pie can have a sodium content of over 400 milligrams of sodium. And one tahina can have a sodium content of 500 milligrams or thereabout. And if you compare the sodium content of these local flour products, which I just mentioned, and you compare them to the bolillo and the telera from the study done in Mexico City, you can see that the sodium content of these bread and flour products, they are very comparable. But that's just half the story. Remember that we may not only consume the homemade flour products or flour products made by the small parlor shops on the side of the road. A lot of us in Trinidad and Tobago, we consume commercial breads and commercial flour products made by food manufacturers both locally and abroad. For example, Kiss enriched bread or Kiss enriched white bread. One slice of Kiss enriched white bread can have a sodium content of 140 milligrams. Now, to drive the point home as to how sodium consumption, how it adds up, how insidious it is, here was a social media post done by that same company. And the question which was asked in the caption was, how fast can you finish a loaf of Kiss enriched bread? Comment either below or to the side or wherever the comment section was. Now here were two comments which are of interest to me. One person said 1 day and another person said 2 days. So now let's see how much, if you are consuming one package of Kiss enriched white bread in 1 day, how much sodium you are consuming. This should be very interesting. As we established, one slice of Kiss enriched white bread has a sodium content of 140 milligrams of sodium in it. There are 20 slices in one package of Kiss enriched white bread. So if you are the person who are consuming 20 slices in 1 day, here is how much sodium you are consuming. The sodium in one package of Kiss enriched white bread has a sodium content of 2800 milligrams of sodium in that one package. And we're just talking about from the bread alone. When you add up the sodium content of whatever was used to make the sandwich, you can see where the sodium consumption can reach astronomical levels. Now let's compare the sodium in one bag of Kiss enriched white bread. If you are consuming it in 1 day, we established that the sodium content is 2800 milligrams of sodium. Now 2800 milligrams of sodium, that is 800 milligrams over the World Health Organization recommendation for sodium intake. And 2800 milligrams is almost double the American Heart Association recommendation of 1500 milligrams of sodium. And mind you, just to take it back to the average sodium consumption of an average citizen of Barbados, it was 2700 milligrams of sodium. So therefore, one package of Kiss enriched white bread has more sodium than the average sodium intake of an average citizen of Barbados, a country in which 4 out of every 10 people are challenged with hypertension. Go figure. Now here are some other commercial products that we in Trinidad and Tobago, what we consume on a regular basis. Kiss Healthy Balance 12 grain and roll oats. One slice of that has 105 milligrams of sodium in it. If there are 20 slices in that package, that's over 2,000 milligrams of sodium in that one package. Kiss Jumbo Hot Dog Rolls with Seeds. One roll has about 300 milligrams of sodium in it. And that's just from the roll alone. We haven't taken into account as yet the hot dog roll, or the hot dog rather, as in the sausage, the condiments, and whatever relishes are used to dress the hot dog. Put all those together and you can see where sodium consumption can just, I wouldn't want to say sneak up on you, but I hope now you're seeing where the sodium consumption, how it adds up. Kiss hot dog rolls, as in without the sesame seeds. One roll has 250 milligrams of sodium in it. And that's just from the roll alone. As I said, not counting the hot dog sausage, the condiments, and the relishes. Kiss enriched wheat bread has even more sodium in one slice than the white bread. So, if you eat one package of Kiss enriched wheat bread in one day, well, now I hope you can figure out how much sodium you're consuming in one day. Here are some other ones. True wheat bread, they have a sodium content of 150 milligrams in one slice of true wheat bread. True multi-seed bread, one slice has 115 milligrams of sodium in it. Salento, 8-inch flour for tortillas. One tortilla has 220 milligrams of sodium in it. Ortega flour tortillas. One tortilla has 115 milligrams of sodium in it. Old El Paso flour tortillas. One tortilla has 135 milligrams of sodium in it. So I hope now it is becoming clear to you as to how sodium consumption, how it sneaks up on you. And I hope now you can get a clearer picture as to how insidious the sodium consumption due to bread and flour products, how insidious it is. So therefore, I hope now that by watching the video up to this point, you have a better or a clearer idea of what the sodium content of the bread and flour products that you are consuming on a regular basis. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show or highlight some possible solutions that you can do in order to defer or to mitigate this excess sodium consumption due to bread and flour products. Now, one solution that you can do is that you can make your bread and flour based products, bake them at home. The best thing to make it with less salt. If not, you're just defeating the purpose of making the bread yourself. Also, another recommendation that I would like to make, especially for people who are being challenged with hypertension and still want to eat their bread, is to make the bread at home with less salt and less fat. A lot of the breads which are made commercially, they are made with either oil or butter or margarine or some kind of fat in it. One slice may not do too much, but when you consume like 3, 4, and 5 slices, the fat content tends to add up. And what happens when you consume too much fat? It tends to make your blood viscous, and when your blood is viscous, it makes the blood harder to flow to reach where it needs to reach. So therefore, when the blood gets more viscous, what happens in order for that blood to reach where it needs to reach? The pressure has to rise. So I hope now that you're getting a clearer picture as to why it is better for you to make your breads at home. Because one thing which you need to note is that the people who are making these bread and flour products for profit, that's what they're making it for. They're making it to make money. Most times they are not making these bread and flour products with your health in mind. And one of the things which I want to advocate for is that there are healthier food products in the population. But until that time, especially for those who are being challenged with hypertension or high blood pressure, you have to be much more aware of the foods that you buy and the foods that you consume. Sad to say, but that's how it is until better can be done. And I'm hoping that I can be a part of that better that can be done. Now, here's an example of a 100% whole wheat bread recipe that I make on, well, a regular basis, because just like you, I tend to live a busy life and I want to have something that is kind of convenient. So this is the recipe that I use. As you can see, it's very simple, 4 ingredients, and as you can see, there's no salt and there's no fat added to it. It's flour, yeast, some sort of sweet ingredient to activate the yeast, whether it be date or fruit syrup or sugar, depending on what I have, and water. Very very simple. The only complaint that most people might have is that this bread, it is not like the fluffy, airy type of bread that you may be familiar with and that you may like. This bread is a much more dense, much more compact bread. But for me, that is what I prefer, because I like to be filled with less food on a regular basis. Another solution is that I can put forth for you in order to mitigate this excess sodium consumption due to bread and flour products is to remove bread from the diet. Now, I know that there may be people out there on hearing that proposal may say that that is blasphemy. But I want to put forward this challenge to you. If you remove bread from your diet, what this can do is that this can make you more open to the other options that are available for you, especially around breakfast time. Some of these foods include whole grains like rice, whether it be brown rice or white rice. You have oats, as in steel cut or roll oats, not the instant oats, because those prepackaged oats tend to have a whole lot of additives added to it, especially sugar and other stuff which you don't need. Steel cut roll oats, that's fair game. Corn is a whole grain, and if you consume whole grains, as they're supposed to be consumed, they are foods which will be of benefit to you, especially for people who are challenged with hypertension or high blood pressure. And there are endless other food options such as sweet potatoes, dashi, yam, cassava, green bananas, and plantains, and that is not even an exhaustive list of the other additional food options that you have. You can have fruit for breakfast. You can have fruits and vegetables for breakfast, along with some whole grains or some starchy foods and so forth. The options are endless. What we have done, sadly, as a nation is that we have conditioned our minds to say that at a particular point in time, we should be eating this type of food group. And I'm saying no. If you open your mind to being open to eating other healthy food groups, other food groups which might be healthier for you, especially for people who are hypertensive, foods which are lower in sodium, foods which are high in potassium, which is, you could say, a double-edged sword, which will help to reduce your blood pressure. If you reduce your sodium and increase your potassium, that is like a two-hit combo, for want of a better word, to lower your blood pressure. That's something for you to think about. Now, if you have watched my videos before, one of the things I talk about in my videos multiple times is about changing the food environment. And I long for the day that the food environment in Trinidad and Tobago changes for the better, where healthier food is more accessible and more affordable to the population. Foods such as fruits and vegetables and whole grains and starchy roots and legumes and peas and beans and so forth, they are made more affordable and more accessible to the population. And the unhealthy foods are made less accessible to the population. But until such time, sorry to say it, especially for you out there who are challenged with hypertension or high blood pressure, the onus is more on you to change the food environment within your house. Start within your house, start changing the food environment there. Make the foods in your household, make them foods which are lower in sodium, high in potassium, and high in all the nutrients which will help you lower your blood pressure and help you to get healthier. And if you want to see why I make the argument for changing the food environment, especially when it comes to hypertension, I put that in this video right here. So feel free to check that out, and I'll see you in the next one.